Have you ever been told by the state that if you don't pony up $3 million, they can destroy your property and send you the bill?
We have.
In part two of this Jolly's Mill Pond audio series, I'll share the story of our dam. I'm Angi Kane. My husband Bill Kane and I are the owners of historic Jolly's Mill Pond Farm in Williamsburg, Virginia. This is part two of our uncut, mostly unedited audio series answering frequently asked questions about who we are and our mission on the farm. As a recap, in part one, I shared part of our origin story, how Bill and I met, our controversial dating as a mixed black and white couple, how we got married, had kids, and then how cancer became the impetus for us to move to Virginia. Now I want to answer another frequently asked question about the reasons for our move, and that really starts with the dam at Jolly's Mill Pond. So let me paint a picture for you. Our property is like stepping back in time. It's mostly forested, raw land, meaning most of it has never had electricity or running water. The wetlands are pristine. They literally have been unchanged for centuries. And if you are in the Williamsburg area, let's say you go to Colonial Williamsburg and you're heading to our property, you'll go past all of the cool stuff that they have going on at Colonial Williamsburg. You'll pass the box stores, the chain restaurants. You'll even pass some of the suburban development and the ongoing kind of suburban sprawl. Then all of a sudden, you'll be asking yourself the question, where am I? Because we are in a protected pocket, at least for the time being, of the James City County section of Williamsburg. So, the pond. The pond was built, or at least the dam that impounds the pond, was built sometime between 1780 and 1820. It was built by the enslaved, who carved out one of our hillsides with basic tools. So it was carved out by hand. And just as a quick note, I'm recording this and there's a thunderstorm right now. So you might occasionally hear a little bit of rumble and a little bit of rain. But back to the dam. So the enslaved carved out one of our hillsides by hand, carted that earth, and packed it to form an eighth of a mile long dam. That dam was built to power a grist mill. This grist mill was operational for about 100 years. It produced cornmeal and flour, and at one point was an industrial mill. We're still not clear on what was produced during that particular time. So what was also intriguing was who worked in the grist mill. We have documentation that shows that there were the enslaved that worked there, and they worked side by side with freedmen and white indentured servants. After it was operational for 100 years, eventually it was demolished. Now, grist mills in this section of Virginia, in this tidewater region of Virginia, weren't these beautiful stone foundation structures. They were small, humble wooden structures, and these mills were key parts of the community, and they were sprinkled all over. So once the mill was demolished, people just carted off different pieces of it. And currently, there are imprints on our property of where the mill used to be, and it will be part of an archaeological survey at some point so that we can really literally dig into more of the past of the property. So what is also unique about our dam is that, one, it is a fairly long dam, and two, over the years, over the top of the dam, people used to use it as a shortcut, and that shortcut became a paved road. So you have this earthen dam topped by a paved country road that went through our property. The community used it for several years, decades upon decades, and they could enjoy this scenic country drive whenever they needed to use it as a shortcut. But in the 1990s, the Department of Dam Safety approached my father-in-law and said that this dam, a low-hazard earthen dam, was out of modern compliance, and that he would have to bring it into modern compliance to the tune of $2 million. So, spoiler, he didn't have $2 million to spend on a public access. What was worked out, though, was a compromise. And eventually, our dam was registered in a state directory of endangered historic sites. And you may find that listing in Preservation Virginia's directory of endangered historic sites. Then there was a back and forth for several years, and Bill was a pivotal part of the negotiations with the Department of Dam Safety. There would be a reasonable compromise, and then once there was a new head of dam safety, then that ended up being there was a change to the compromise, and then there was another flare up. You've got to bring this into modern compliance. Back and forth, back and forth. So by the time we moved down here and we were getting settled in 2018, we were called into a meeting with the Department of Dam Safety and some county officials. And we were told if we didn't bring our dam into modern compliance, they would breach it at our expense. And at that point, the cost was $3 million for a low hazard dam, and minimal money that was available through the state to meet with all of their regulations for this mandate. So this mandate stipulates that any of the trees that grew up on either side of the dam had to be cut down, their stumps ground up, the holes backfilled, and then 1.1 acres of untouched wetland had to be removed. Any tree that was in that wetland, those 1.1 acres, would have to be cut down. And that would cost us $3 million. Another spoiler, kids, we didn't have $3 million to spend on a public access like that. And the only way to drop the cost of compliance was to close the road that went over the dam. It started with a temporary closure, and then that kicked off community outrage, the likes of which we frankly weren't prepared for. We were dealing with people holding secret meetings. We were dealing with people who felt like they were entitled to use a shortcut through our property. We were dealing with people who resented our presence there as landowners. And mind you, the reason why we moved, one of the reasons why we moved, was to protect the character of this place and still make it pay for itself. So I had just finished up production on a documentary that I'd been working on. And that was a life-changing experience. We were fortunate that at its conclusion, our team won an Emmy for it, and that was fantastic. The documentary is called Heard, as in people want to be heard. You can find it on PBS. It's still streaming. But that was a phenomenal experience. But after that, we walked into a buzzsaw of controversy. There were articles written about us in the local paper full of misinformation. And it was just astounding what we were dealing with. But Bill and I were shoulder to shoulder, and we were tackling things step by step. We'd hoped that there would be some sort of compromise, some sort of resources that we could tap into that would allow us to keep this stretch of road open. But there was another aspect to this. Over the years, people were driving heavier and heavier trucks and cars. They were ignoring the weight limits on this 200-year-old dam. And they were putting more and more pressure on this historic site. And nobody was paying for any of that except us. So ultimately, after the community took things too far, Bill and I made the decision that we would cooperate with the county to close that stretch of road. And that was not met with a ton of enthusiasm from people who didn't understand what we were dealing with. Because by closing that stretch of road, the cost of compliance would drop from $3 million to $1 million. And we're still on the hook for $1 million to bring it into modern compliance. But we at least need to get that Valpak deal. So we cut our costs significantly. But the larger point of what we were doing was protecting the character of this place. Places like our property are truly endangered. There isn't a ton of support from the state. There aren't a lot of programs. We just want to do what's right by our property and what it stands for. And part of the character that's attached to our property is its largely unknown Black history. The enslaved people who toiled to build a structure that is standing today. The freedmen and the first Black entrepreneur who owned the pond. Their stories were going to be part of our mission. And in part 3 of this Jolly's Mill Pond audio series, answering frequently asked questions, I'll share some of this unknown Black history that became the foundation of the work that we do today. So thank you for listening so far. This part was a little longer than I anticipated it would be, but describing the history of the dam required a little bit more time. But I do have this to ask of you. If you like what you're hearing, if you want to support the work that we're doing, Follow us, subscribe to our social media channels. We're Jolly's Mill Pond on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. And we do have a burgeoning TikTok account, Taste Local History. Another way you can show your support is supporting us by buying our products, scooping up a group of your friends, family, classmates, and attend some of our upcoming culinary heritage classes, which include the history of Virginian teas, history of bacon, and the history of barbecue. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to part of our story. I'm Angi Kane, and I'm looking forward to sharing more in part 3.